Hey there, Parker X listeners. This is Brett Wood, and in today's episode, we're going to talk to Adam Jones, Deputy Director over Operations and Parking with the Downtown Tempe Authority in Tempe, Arizona. In this conversation, we'll talk about Adam's history in the parking industry, how in Tempe he's managing parking under the umbrella of a business improvement district, how that allows him to use parking to leverage a better downtown environment in Tempe, how he's created a public parking system with private parking assets to create the perception of a holistic parking system without building parking, how he's improved policies and technologies in the community to improve customer service and what that means to the community, and finally, transportation and mobility trends Adam is seeing in Tempe and throughout the country. Hope you enjoy. All right, this is Brett Wood with Parker X, and today we're sitting down with Adam Jones from the Downtown Tempe Authority. Adam is the parking director, deputy director, vice president. What's your title nowadays?
Technically vice president.
Okay. He's basically the czar of parking for all of Tempe, Arizona, and today we're going to talk a little bit about his story of how he's transformed this community, but we'd like to start off with just a little bit about how you got into the parking industry in your early days. Why don't you take us back to the beginning?
Well, that's going way back. I truly am one of the children of parking, I guess you can say. My first job was when I was 14 years old. I got a part-time job as a cashier in a parking garage and kind of stuck with it. Continued on through high school, was a supervisor while I was in high school, and went on to college, did it, and then after that, I've been in parking minus 7 years, where I got out and did some real estate investing.
Right.
But back in it now, and it's been very good to me.
14 years old, man. That's really, you can't get out of it. You got suckered in as a teenager, and yeah, I've been stuck there ever since with it.
Yeah, and I actually really learned to drive really in the parking industry, because I was actually parking cars before I was even legally able to drive technically. So,
well, we won't tell anybody.
Yeah, we won't mention a company name.
So that was in Cincinnati that you started your parking career.
Yeah, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay, so you were with was it Central Parking in the early days coming out of?
Well, when I first started, I was with a company called System Parking, and then transitioned over to a company called Century Parking, and then I was with Central for the better part of about 14 years, I believe.
Okay, so where did that take you? Cincinnati?
Well, started in Cincinnati, moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, was there for a couple of years as the general manager there, then went to Knoxville, Tennessee, and then on to Minneapolis, and that was my last stop with Central was Minneapolis. All great cities. Okay.
Well, what led you to Tempe, Arizona, and parking out here?
That's very interesting. While in the real estate world, things were going great, and we were flipping a lot of houses, and along came the recession or downturn that happened back in 08 and 09, and I said, I guess I got to get a big boy job again. So started looking at different avenues and came across a unique opportunity with an enhanced services district in Tempe, Arizona, also known as BIDs, or Business Improvement Districts in most other cities. And quite honestly, my wife made a decision. She was originally from here, and she goes, that's where we're going to go. And I said, okay, that's good. So it was interesting. It was stepping out into something that I had never done before. I was aware of downtown organizations. I had actually sit on a board of a couple of them in the past. So it was a unique turn, and one I definitely don't regret.
Well, I know your wife quite well. She's a real smart lady, so I'm glad she made that decision. So it is very unique for a BID or an enhanced services district to manage parking. I mean, there's not a lot of them out there that do it, and there's certainly not a lot of them out there that do it well. Kind of explain the nature of how a BID gets into managing parking and what that means, contrary to like an operator or a municipality doing it.
Sure. Well, there's typically a district that a BID or an enhanced services area would manage, and there's long since been a movement to where some of the parking dollars should be reinvested back into districts through various clean and safe initiatives or landscaping or special events or what have you. So I think that's how it really got started here back in the early 90s. At that point in time, they were managing just the on-street meters, and it evolved into a couple surface lots and ultimately a parking garage. So when I came here to visit, needless to say, I wasn't really overwhelmed at that point in time by the opportunity, but I also started looking at it from an operator standpoint and not just a downtown bid standpoint. And I approached the organization, the board of directors, and said, "Hey, do you mind if I go out and try to secure other opportunities?" And they're like, "No, not at all." So my unique selling proposition when I went out to the private property owners was, "Hey, why not let us manage your parking? We're going to create what is a unified marketing and wayfinding type program." Because the average consumer coming downtown doesn't care who owns, who manages, who controls. It's just they're going to look at it as like, hey, where do I park and how much is it going to cost me? So did that and just said, hey, if you work with us, what monies we make, a fair management fee will be reinvested back into the downtown district 100%. And that enabled us to establish a safety patrol program. It enabled us to establish a ground support or cleaning crew type program. So all of those monies get what we're being reinvested just in clean and safe initiatives, but now we've moved on to bigger events and more placemaking type efforts, activating spaces in the downtown. So it's been a great thing for us, and it allows us to control the message and look at parking holistically, manage the inventory much better than if there were several different companies or organizations doing that.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's one of the more impressive things you've done here is compiling private parking into a public parking system. One of the things I tell a lot of people about Tempe is just, it's not a very big footprint. There's not a lot of land mass here. You are cornered on one side by one of the biggest universities in terms of people in the
Yes.
U.S., and you're all fighting for the same space, right? And where most cities would have just either thrown in the towel and let the private sector drive parking or the development sector drive parking, you've done a really good job of going out and bringing them in. And to the early days of going and getting U.S. Airways to open their private employee garage up to public parking, whether that was at night or during the day or whenever it was, to now, there's major corporations on the lakeside up here that you've got private and public parking mixing in. When you first did it, the first time you said, I want to go out and I want to manage private parking, was it difficult to get the private sector to play ball, to be engaged in that?
That's a great question. And I think I was lucky at the time in the fact that a lot of the properties were starting to change hands. The city, we had multiple conversations with the city, and the city of Tempe's a great partner in this with us, but they really had no desire to utilize parking at that time as an economic development tool. And what I mean specifically by that is to build their own parking. Their idea was to let the marketplace take hold and generate that based on each individual development, which is fine. But where I was able to get involved kind of created a happy medium. The private property owners owned it and controlled it, but we were able to get involved and help manage that and help communicate it, and also create some shared parking models that allowed access to some private locations that weren't always available. We also had an issue at that time where there were a lot of surface lots in the downtown that were slated for development that hadn't been developed yet because of the economic downturn. And a lot of those locations were being policed by rogue towing companies. So we were getting tons of complaints every weekend on cars being towed because people didn't know where they should park. So it enabled me to go to these private property owners and said, hey, let's partner together, and you can monetize this all the while helping the downtown and creating a better environment for the people coming down here. If they had no intention of doing that, I worked with them to make sure that it was signed correctly to let people know, hey, you can't park here. It's not public parking. It's actually private, and if you do park here, you're gonna be towed. On the larger properties, the parking garages, again, like I said, there were some of them that were changing hands, new owners coming in, and they were looking at ways to generate revenue and try to increase the investment of their asset. So I met with each one of them and just went to them and said, hey, I've got a background in managing Class A properties. I learned a great deal of that in my years with Central and other companies, and was able to convince them to let us manage it, which was kind of risky, I guess, in some of these bigger companies' minds. But I got their mind put at ease, and in every case where we took the operation over, we were able to increase revenue, decrease expenses, and get better overall utilization out of the asset.
See that carrot right there. Like I work in a lot of communities, and if anybody's ever talked to me, they know I'm a proponent of shared parking. Like
Sure.
I'm tired of us building parking that goes underutilized, and that carrot of generating revenue, whether it's transient event revenue or transient nightly revenue, or if we can really squeeze it, transient daily revenue while they're mixing in their office parkers or their monthly parkers, and we're filling in the gaps in those spaces, it should be a big enough carrot. But we work in so many places where the private sector says that's still not enough. Did you ever get any pushback about, well, there's liability issues, there's concern about safety and security in my garages for my tenants, and how did you address those when you started working with the private sector here?
Well, we agree to provide the liability insurance as part of a fee to them, and we just tell them right off the bat, we're not a security contractor. We're not qualified to be a security contractor, and that falls directly on them to provide that, as is the case in most privately owned parking operations. So got a little bit of pushback here and there, but I think I was able to handle the objections and get them to move past that and understand that that's just the cost of doing business.
Right. So you mentioned the revenue, and in most cases they've gone up. You're creating positive revenue. You don't have to give me a number, but like in terms of percentage, what are we talking about revenue increases for private sector around here?
Well, on one garage in particular that I can think of, we were able to reduce expenses by half right off the bat, and revenue doubled. And part of that was there were leases that had not been reviewed by the current operator, nor was it being reviewed by the property manager, because at that point in time, I mean, the vacancy rates were pretty high down here. They weren't really looking at those types of things. It was more along the lines of what can we do to maintain what we've got, so to speak. And so I was able to just start looking and reviewing and auditing these leases and plugging numbers in, and started realizing there was tons of parking that wasn't even being billed or paid for. And it's hard to argue with something that's in your lease that both parties have signed. So when we were able to bring that up, it wasn't about collecting what had been gone uncollected for the previous years. It was about just, hey, let's get this right now and moving forward. And so we track all of that, and we use a great program called Paris that allows us to input that lease data in there and pre-program increases and things of that nature. So it's been a huge help for us. But you got to know where to look first, and that was just something that wasn't being done before.
Right. So I mean, that's a win. That's a
Sure.
win for the property owner or parking garage owner or whoever it may be. That's a win for you because you're generating more revenue for this organization, which is a win for the community because then
Sure.
you're reinvesting that back in. And it's a win for the community at large because we've created more parking supply where there basically was none. And I moved here in 2010, I believe.
Yep.
We met just about that time.
Sure.
And when I first started coming to Tempe, there were basically like 2 or 3 public parking garages. You had just opened the City Hall parking garage right down the road, and that was the big one. And then overnight, you just went from 2 parking garages to 4 or 5, and management of several surface lots, and then redevelopment of those surface lots. It's been incredible to see just how it's grown. And now you tell me you're kind of at a place where you've reached like peak capacity. You're starting to see your spaces being utilized at a very high rate. You mentioned also this concept of like using your parking as economic development. It stimulated a lot of development.
Sure.
So I mean, how have you seen parking as a system kind of grow the community, and what have been your major successes that you like to sell to your organization, to the city?
Well, I think it's kind of twofold. We can talk about on the city side. When I first arrived here in '09, they had just typical coin-fed meters, and really there was really no money in the budget at that time to go out and purchase any new multi-space meters or credit card-enabled single-space meters. So we were able to work with the IPS group and do a lease to own on those meters. So we introduced credit card acceptance right away. We rolled out a mobile payment option. We installed sensors in the ground to track occupancy, and then I mean, we went just overnight revenue. It's really even hard to explain. We're talking several 100% increase from one year to the next, just in the changes that we did on the on-street program. Later on, we changed it even more. We extended the meter enforcement times to 10 p.m. And I did get some pushback on that. But how we got past that was we did just the old-fashioned license plate inventories, and we started realizing that the people that were using those spaces were employees that had parking already at off-street locations, but were just choosing to take up the more premium on-street spaces. So it wasn't getting the use. It wasn't being used by the intended folks coming downtown. So we were able to do a lot of those things, and we were the first to incorporate credit card payments at meters. We were the first to do in Arizona, that is, for cities. We were the first to do a lot of those different things, and now we're looking what's the next best thing. So now we're looking to outfit the many garages we have with a seamless, systematic system. That we can a park system. So we're getting ready to install flash at 2 locations now, and our goal is to hopefully get the same system throughout all of downtown, because working with the city and working with private property owners, you can imagine we have multiple systems and multiple back-end products that we're managing, and we're happy to manage those, but we know there's a better way to do it.
Yeah, I was. We did a study together a few years back. One of your last strategic plans here in town, and I think one of the funniest moments was Dave Meredith was your assistant director at the time, and he was showing us. We were asking about data. What can we get from the back end systems from your parks equipment? And he takes us back in the back, and he's got this desk with like 3 computers set up on it. I'm like, Dave, you got a real command center here going on, right? And he's like, nope, this is one park system for these garages. This is one park system for these garages. This is one for these garages. Do they talk to each other? No, they don't talk to each other. Can you combine the data in a spreadsheet? No, we can't combine the data in a spreadsheet. I have to work from 3 different computers. So I can't imagine. You do have a lot of different people that you report to, and different interests in your parks equipment. So
Sure.
I would imagine there's a lot of variability there. But you've been on the bleeding edge of technology for this community, the greater Phoenix area, since I've been here. The on-street system is really cool. The sensors, you installed those, and what was the intent with the sensors initially?
Well, I think the intent was to get true occupancy data. That's something that we've never had, or they never had before, and it's easy now with a true communicating system in IPS, or whether you look at Civic Smart or what have you. Everybody can get to transactional data, but the transactional data does not show the whole story, nor does it zero out meters when a person leaves. And I got some pushback on that initially as well. And I'm like, it's one of those things that you don't. There's ordinance against feeding meters for other people. So why should we leave an hour or 2 on a meter for somebody that left for the next person to pull in? Because as we all know, that creates congestion. If people know that's possible, they're going to circle and they're going to circle until they find a meter with time
They'll
on
start
it.
figuring out that green light's blinking, right?
Exactly.
So,
So we eliminated that portion, and we got another bump from revenue there as well. So, but that again, revenue was not the intent, because all the revenue that's being made in the program for the city is being reinvested back into transportation demand management initiatives, and now we're looking at establishing a TMA that can better help with the congestion that we're now experiencing, which leads me to where we are today. Over the last 7-8 years, we've experienced significant growth. For I think 3 to 4 years straight, Tempe was the most active submarket in the United States when it comes to real estate development, as it relates to Class A office space development, and also we're pretty high up there with the residential development. So, just in the last I would say 7-8 years, we've went up almost 4 million square feet in Class A office space, more than 2,500 residential units. And we've got two major hotels, a Westin and a Hilton under construction right now, and 2 more planned to break ground here in the near while, probably in the next several months. So
that's also not to mention 8 to 10,000 new freshmen showing up every August or September. Population keeps swelling right there across Mill Avenue too. So
another thing that's quite interesting, the change that I've seen happen when I first arrived here, we were basically a nighttime economic community, meaning that we had a lot of office space that was vacant, some projects that were started and stopped because of funding running out, but we had a lot of bars, restaurants, nighttime entertainment options. That has since flip-flopped somewhat now. We still have a nighttime destination, although we have a lot more competition in other valley cities, but we are really busy now in the daytime. And what comes with being busy in the daytime? Traffic. So now we're battling congestion issues, and what can we do to help offset that with various we've got a streetcar project under construction right now. We light rail opened up about 11 years ago, so those 2 things are going to connect, and we're just looking at any different types of projects we can do that helps offset that.
Right.
We've got employers that are being very proactive in doing cash outs, encouraging them to use the public transportation or carpool. We're starting to launch a carpool app here very soon that will offer a guaranteed ride home. So it's exciting times. So it's just we don't want it to get to where we get to gridlock.
Right.
And
and again, I mean, for anybody that's never been to Tempe, I mean, pull it up on Google Maps and look at it. Look at the Mill Avenue district. Look at ASU. It's not a super large footprint, but it probably has the most, I would say, daytime and nighttime activity that you'll find in the Phoenix, Valley, just in this small footprint. And when we talk about congestion, you're bordered by a lake on the north, a university on your east, neighborhoods on your west and to your south. I mean, there's just not a lot of room for people to go other than up from a development standpoint. And there's really not a lot of room left on your roadways for cars. So it's good to hear that the city and DTA are thinking about Transportation Management Association, the TMA. ASU's thinking about how do they improve their transportation footprint, because I think that's all you've got to do is how do you now start getting people to think about different options and take that light rail that's right outside the window right now. I mean, that's great. So let me get back to one other thing about bids, managing parking, because we started talking about that and then we launched into all these really cool things you're doing. I know of a couple of other programs that come to mind that are doing, like Boulder is a bid managing parking. But again, they're not like you. They don't manage more than just the public sector. And then Ann Arbor is another one that does a pretty good job with it. And I think one of the really cool things that all of y'all do from a bid managing parking perspective is everything is focused on customer service. Like everything is about improving the experience downtown.
Sure.
That goes back to your reinvesting your money. It goes back to what you're doing with Clean and Safe. It goes back to what you do with branding and wayfinding. So it's all about the customer. One of the things that I really find interesting that you did from a customer perspective, and this goes back to your early days, was pretty early on when you first got here, you were managing the City Hall garage. You were managing Hayden Square garage, which is basically a lot with buildings on top of it.
Sure.
And on street. And then you took over enforcement. So tell me a little bit about that transition of enforcement from the regulatory body. The police were doing enforcement, I think.
Sure.
And then you taking over. How did that look?
Well, it was a point of contention when I first arrived here because the police department did have enforcement under their arm, but the people doing enforcement had other responsibilities too. So they would assist the police officers during traffic congestion, or responding to accidents, or whatever else that may be needed. So you might get very consistent and sometimes what would be considered even heavy-handed enforcement over a period of a week or two, and then you might not get anybody down here for a month or two, just for various things that might be happening to no fault of any individual, but just the demands are more higher priority than probably parking enforcement. So I had brought the conversation up, and it wasn't really received well at first because we were just trying to create a vertical arm of managing everything. And shortly thereafter, various departments within the city had to cut budgets. And one of the things that they said, okay, well, we'll just get rid of parking enforcement. And that opened up the door for us to do. And I was able to convince them that we did not really need to add any more dollars to our budget to do it, because the revenue would increase over time due to consistent enforcement to more than offset or pay for the cost of the enforcement officers. And so early on, the number and the amount of traffic tickets that we wrote for expired meter and loading zone violations and things of that nature were quite high. And the revenue for the meters themselves were still kind of low. But over time, and as the months went by, that started to balance out. And soon thereafter, within just, I'd say, 6 to 8 months, the revenue for the meters increased dramatically. And then our number of citations that we wrote started to decrease dramatically.
Isn't it funny how that happens? You start training people to do the right thing, and money goes up, they get less tickets, the experience gets better for everybody.
Exactly. And I can't take credit for coining this phrase. I've heard it before I started using it, but we changed the name of the program from parking enforcement to parking compliance, and we trained our employees as ambassadors. So they were trained on every aspect of the downtown. They knew where every restaurant was. They knew how to get to wherever you wanted to go. They were trained to know where that destination was. They offered things such as if you run out of gas, or if you needed a jump start, or if you locked your keys in your car. So we approached everything from a customer service perspective and education. So if we see somebody that's doing something wrong, we're going to give them every opportunity to correct that action and do the right thing. Now, does that always happen?
No.
Of course not. So we're there to issue tickets, and we still do issue tickets, and that probably will never change.
I mean, you've probably got 80% of your citizens that get tickets because they don't know when and where and how to park, and another 20% that are just going to break the rules no matter what.
Sure.
And if we focus on writing tickets for that 20% that are breaking the rules and educating the other 80%, life is better for everybody involved.
Well, and I try to do something novel and actually listen to what people say and if they bring up a complaint, well, I didn't know this, or I didn't know that, or I have an objection because of this, I try to address those objections. One of the things that you'll see in most cities that you go to is when you pull up on a street, you don't know how long the meters are enforced. You don't know how much you got to pay. You don't have to do any of that until you get out of your car, find a meter, and look at the screen or what have you. So one of the things that I did was establish a wayfinding signage program to where I advertised it on the back of the single-space credit card-enabled meters that let anyone know via a color code and a time that was stamped right on there how long it's enforced or what's the time limit, and then how long you have to pay. So no one would be surprised, if you will, when they get out of their car and walk away thinking they didn't have to pay, that it ended at 5 or 6, which was typical in the past.
Yeah, I actually used your graphic in a presentation last week for its simplicity of, it's demand-based policy and pricing, where SF Park, when they did theirs, they changed it block to block, and it was, you had to get out and try to figure out, was it 4, was it 6, whatever it was. The graphic you had was basically purple, green, orange, and whatever the other color was, but it was so simple to understand. And again, just customer focused, thoughtful about the customer, giving them that information. So
Sure.
kudos. Yeah, great job.
Well, I give a lot of that credit to my wife because when I come up with a signage plan or whatever, I run it by her and she'll either say, "Yeah, that works," or "No, you're an idiot. You need to change that." Who's gonna understand that?
I know the feeling.
So,
I get you're an idiot more often than I get good job. So
but if you think about it, that's the people that we should be running these ideas by, because if I call you and ask you what you think, you're going to know all of this stuff already. But if I go out to John Q. Public on the street and ask him, he needs to be able to understand that. And if it brings more, a confused mind says no. So if they're going to be confused about it, they're never going to have a positive thing to say.
that's right.
So all I'm doing is listening to our customers and trying to address their objections, and look at any no or yeah, I look at no as an opportunity.
Yep.
If they say no, then okay, I've got an opportunity to change their mind.
That's right. Or help
So,
me figure out how to change my mind and do it. Yeah.
Help me figure it out, because I don't have it figured out. I learn stuff new every day, and we're in an age right now where technology is and all the different offerings in our industry is changing daily, when probably the first 20 years it didn't change at all. So it's fun, but it's also tiresome to try to keep up with all of that and talk to all the different companies that are out there. But yeah, we just do our best to try to keep up to date on the offerings and provide our customers the best possible scenario.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of it here, man. So kudos to that. All right, so last question. I'm always fascinated by asking my friends this. You know, what scares you about the parking and transportation industry over the next 5 to 10 years? What are the things that worry you in terms of disruption to our lives and our jobs?
I think, well, from my standpoint, I tell you that what scares me is analysis or paralysis of analysis.
Yeah.
There's so much to look at, so many things to evaluate, that, I mean, you can really just get bogged down on constantly evaluating different products or services, and nothing gets done. So from my perspective, that's what I'm kind of fearful of, and I'm trying to avoid that as best I can. But from another standpoint is balancing actual need today versus perceived need in the future. We just attended a meeting a little bit ago that talked about what the demand is today, but what's it going to look like in 10 years from now? And if the demand is superseding what our needs are today, do we address that immediately, knowing that it could be a risky proposition 10, 15 years down the road? So I think it's balance. I think it's balancing the needs and addressing them today, but also being very cognizant of what tomorrow holds.
Yeah, no, it's and you're a perfect petri dish of that here in Tempe, because you're at a point where adding parking would likely make sense. You don't have very many places to do that, but adding some parking would likely make sense. But you have to ask yourself, what are the impacts of light rail in 5 years? What are the impacts of the streetcar when it opens
Sure.
and extends out and starts connecting things? What happens when your neighbor to the east changes their policy or enrolls another 100,000 students? And by God, what happens when autonomous vehicles show up in 10, 20 years? And so how does that change everything? And so you got to be very thoughtful about how we plan for today and its impacts on tomorrow, because parking spaces are not cheap. In a high-intensity urban environment like this, I'm going to guess you're paying $25,000 or $30,000 a space for a really ugly parking structure, and they're not cheap to manage and not cheap to operate, and they take 30 years to pay off. So, being conscientious is pretty important. So, it was interesting. We were just in a meeting with a lot of really thoughtful people from around the community talking about that very thing, and I think that's where we as groups need to go, is just all of us coming together and talking about the options, rather than the developer building his own parking and the university building their own parking and the city building their own parking, and you end up with 2,000 or 3,000 spaces you can't use. Let's build the right amount today, manage it as best as we can, and then grow into tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that one of the things that I see that's changed today versus 20 years ago would not be the same is we talk with other operators, and I know other operators talk with other operators. So the sharing of information is becoming more of a common theme than not anymore, because granted, everybody's got their unique set of services that they're trying to advertise and sell to a client, but it's the community as a whole that we have to really make sure that we're servicing. And if that's not being serviced and people are not having great experiences when they're visiting downtown or whatever destination, because parking is typically the first and last impression, we all lose. So it's just working together as best we can, sharing of resources where it's appropriate, and we can put our best foot forward together as a whole and better service our customers.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Very good. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sitting down with me today. Anything else you want to share before we wrap things up?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, and I know there's a lot of people out there that's got pretty cool stories to share, and I hope that maybe my little story here will help somebody somewhere else.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, thank you very much, and good job here in Tempe, and look forward to talking and learning more.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the podcast. Having a great time doing this. If you're enjoying it, if you're getting value from it, please leave some feedback. Please subscribe. There's a lot of people listening, not as many subscribers. So if you could subscribe, comment, and share it. Please share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Tell your mom. Tell your dad. Tell everyone. Thanks.